At the edge of town, the old municipal warehouse stood silent under the pale glow of the moon. Every night, Vincent, a seasoned security guard, clocked in for his graveyard shift. Over the years, he'd grown accustomed to the eerie quiet and the occasional creaks of an aging building settling into the night. But tonight was different. At precisely midnight, as Vincent settled in his tiny security booth, the silence was punctuated by an unsettling whisper, so soft it almost seemed like the wind. He checked the monitors. The camera feed showed the empty, dusty corridors of the warehouse. Yet the voice persisted, a faint murmur that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. Vincent rose from his chair, his flashlight in hand. He walked the dim corridors, following the ghostly murmur. The sound grew clearer near an abandoned storage room. His pulse quickened as he reached for the door handle. It creaked open on its own, revealing a room filled with long-forgotten boxes and relics from decades past. In the center of the room, a single wooden chair rocked slowly back and forth. As he stepped closer, the whisper coalesced into distinct words. "Help me." The voice was sorrowful, laden with a grief that chilled him to the bone. Vincent's rational mind raced. Surely it was nothing more than the building's acoustics. But as he shone his flashlight over the chair, the beam fell on a dusty ledger resting on a table. Its pages were filled with handwritten names and dates that stretched back nearly a century. An uneasy feeling nagged at Vincent. He recalled stories of workers who had perished in a terrible accident in the warehouse long ago, a fire that had claimed several lives. Suddenly, the whisper turned to a desperate cry. "Don't leave me here," it pleaded. Vincent's heart pounded as he flipped through the ledger. In the margin of one page was a name, Eleanor Price, dated 1923. Her entry was marked with a sorrowful symbol, a small, hastily drawn heart crossed out. A cold wind rushed through the room, scattering loose papers. The rocking chair suddenly stopped, and for a moment, the room was filled with an oppressive silence. Then the door slammed shut behind him. Vincent's flashlight flickered as the whisper returned, now sounding angry and forlorn. "Set me free," it commanded. Vincent backed away, his instincts warring with his duty. The voice was real, he was certain now, but what did it want? Summoning courage, he spoke aloud. "Who are you? How can I help you?" The answer came not in words, but in a surge of static across the intercom. The ledger pages fluttered, as if caught in a fierce gust, and the faint outline of a woman appeared by the ledger, a spectral figure in a faded dress, eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. Her lips moved silently as if reciting a long-forgotten prayer. Vincent could only watch, transfixed by the profound sadness radiating from her form. The temperature dropped sharply, and his breath became visible. He remembered his training. Rationality must prevail. Yet in that moment, empathy overcame him. "Eleanor," he whispered, "I'm going to help you." Following an impulse he couldn't explain, Vincent gathered the ledger and the chair. In his mind, the only way to set her free was to acknowledge her story. He spent the rest of his shift documenting her tale in his logbook, detailing the ledger's entries, the spectral image, and the haunting whisper. As the first light of dawn crept in, the oppressive presence slowly lifted. The door opened on its own, and the spectral figure faded into a gentle glow, leaving Vincent alone with the echo of her final, lingering plea. For weeks afterward, the warehouse never again produced that desperate whisper. Vincent's logbook became local lore, and whispers of Eleanor Price's tragic fate spread among the night guards. Though the building remained eerie and unyielding, a small measure of peace seemed to have settled over it, a silent thank you from a long-lost soul finally freed. In a sprawling industrial park on the outskirts of the city, Marlon worked the graveyard shift at a closed-down factory-turned-storage facility. The building, a concrete labyrinth of corridors and locked rooms, provided him with a sense of security, until one fateful night when the past came crashing through its doors. It began with a distant clamor in the far corner of the facility. Marlon, who prided himself on his attentiveness, paused his routine patrol. The sound was like heavy footsteps mixed with urgent whispers. Thinking it was a stray animal or perhaps a malfunctioning piece of machinery, he shrugged it off. But as the noises grew louder and more organized, his skin prickled with unease. He grabbed his flashlight and ventured into the labyrinthine corridors. At the end of a narrow hallway, near a large metal door that was supposed to remain locked, he caught sight of a shadow moving swiftly. His heart raced as he followed the figure. The dim light revealed nothing more than a glimpse of a man in tattered clothing disappearing behind a stack of crates. Marlon's mind raced. The facility had been abandoned for years, but rumors persisted about its grim history. Stories of an inmate who had escaped from a nearby prison decades ago. He recalled the legend of Henry Dawson, a dangerous criminal whose attempted escape was rumored to have ended in a bloody standoff. Yet no one had ever seen him again. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed again, closer this time. Marlon turned a corner and came face to face with a figure. Under the flicker of his flashlight, the man's eyes glinted with wild desperation. His clothes were torn and smeared with dirt and blood. Marlon's instincts screamed to run, but the man raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please, help me," the man rasped. His voice was broken and hoarse, laden with both terror and determination. Marlon hesitated, conflicted between duty and compassion. The man's appearance was disheveled, but there was something unmistakably dangerous in his gaze. "Who are you?" Marlon demanded, keeping his distance. "I'm Henry Dawson," the man confessed in a trembling whisper. "I've been on the run all these years. They're after me, and I'm trying to get away from them." His eyes darted to the dark corners of the corridor, as if expecting armed pursuers to materialize at any moment. Marlon's mind churned with disbelief. Could it really be the legendary escaped inmate? The details were hazy, a ghost story to scare off trespassers. Yet, here he stood, soaked in sweat, his eyes pleading for mercy. Before Marlon could decide, a loud crash reverberated through the facility. Heavy footsteps pounded toward them. The sound wasn't coming from Henry, it was something else. A group, perhaps? Henry's eyes widened. "They're here," he hissed. They never gave up the chase. In that instant, Marlon realized that the true threat wasn't Henry himself, but whoever, or whatever, was pursuing him. The pounding footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing ominously in the concrete hall. Without another word, Henry bolted down the corridor. Marlon stood frozen, torn between the urge to help and the duty to protect the facility. Then, as if summoned by fate, he heard a shout from behind. "Stop!" A voice rang out, authoritative and commanding. Moments later, armed security burst into view, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. In the ensuing chaos, Henry was cornered against a wall. Security officers shouted orders, and in the confusion, Henry's wild eyes met Marlon's for a fleeting second. A silent plea for understanding before he was forcefully restrained. The mysterious pursuers were nowhere to be seen. It was clear that a man's desperate attempt to escape had drawn unwanted attention from a hidden network. Marlon watched, heart heavy, as the security team escorted Henry away. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of unspoken regrets. Had he done the right thing by not intervening further? Was Henry really the terror he was reputed to be, or merely a broken soul caught in an endless chase? Later that night, as Marlon resumed his patrol, he found a small, weathered notebook lying near the spot where Henry had vanished. It was filled with scribbled notes, accounts of life on the run, memories of betrayal, and cryptic mentions of a group that had hunted him relentlessly. The final entry read, "They'll never let me go, not until I face my past." Marlon tucked the notebook into his coat, the revelation burning into his mind. By the break of dawn, the facility was quiet again, the echoes of the night's events lingering like a dark secret. Marlon couldn't shake the image of Henry's haunted eyes or the relentless sound of footsteps. The legend of Henry Dawson had taken on a new, terrifying reality, one that would forever change how Marlon viewed his solitary graveyard shift. On a chilly autumn night, Celia started her shift at the 24-hour call center located in a nondescript office building downtown. The building was a relic from another era, its hallways lined with faded wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. Celia, a dedicated night shift supervisor, prided herself on her ability to work through the long, lonely hours. But on this night, something felt dreadfully off. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Phones rang intermittently, and Celia monitored the computers with practiced detachment. Yet, as the clock neared 2 a.m., the atmosphere shifted. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to morph into a low, insistent moan that echoed through the empty corridors. Celia's skin prickled as she glanced around. The lights overhead flickered, casting long, distorted shadows. Unable to ignore the growing unease, she left her station to check on the backup generators in the storage closet. As she made her way down a narrow corridor, the sound of whispered voices followed her, voices that didn't belong to any coworker. They spoke in disjointed fragments, their words laced with malice and sorrow. Celia's heart pounded as she reached the heavy door leading to the generator room. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing only darkness inside. Inside, the air was freezing cold. The generator itself was silent, but the walls were covered in odd, scratch-like marks. Suddenly, a guttural laugh echoed in the darkness, a sound that was both mocking and deeply sorrowful. Celia's hand trembled as she shone her flashlight around. For a brief moment, in the flickering beam, she saw a figure standing in the corner. A hunched, dark shape with eyes that glowed red before disappearing into the shadows. Celia stumbled backward, her mind racing. Was this a prank? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But as she retreated down the corridor, the lights above her began to dim further, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't long before the voices coalesced into a single, commanding presence that spoke directly into her mind. "Stay with me forever." Desperate to escape, Celia bolted for the stairwell. But as she reached the door, it slammed shut on its own. Panic set in. She pounded on the door, calling out for help, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence that now dominated the building. The red glow reappeared at the top of the stairs, as if someone or something was watching her every move. In the minutes that followed, time stretched into an endless nightmare. Celia could hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps echoing in the hallways, and the sound of something dragging across the floor. Each creak of the building amplified her terror. The phone at her desk rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the darkness. Celia answered, voice trembling. There was no human on the other end, only a distorted, demonic hiss that repeated, "Stay with me, stay." Celia's rational mind fought against the terror as she tried to call security, but the line was dead. With trembling determination, she made her way back toward the main office, where the emergency exit was located. The corridors seemed to stretch impossibly long, lit only by the sporadic flicker of failing bulbs. Along the way, she passed the glass-walled conference room. In its reflection, she saw a figure behind her, a tall, gaunt presence with hollow eyes and a grin that split its face unnaturally wide. She whipped around, but no one was there. Her footsteps quickened as she reached the front lobby. The heavy glass doors were locked, and no sign of a working security system greeted her. As the demonic laughter crescendoed, the temperature dropped sharply, and the oppressive presence pressed in on all sides. In that moment, Celia realized that this was no mere haunting. It was an entity, a malevolent force that had taken possession of the building. Summoning all her courage, Celia searched the lobby for any sign of control. She found a dusty, old intercom system near the reception desk. In a shaking voice, she spoke into it. "If anyone is out there, please help me." For a long, agonizing minute, nothing responded except the echo of her own plea. Then the intercom crackled, and a distorted voice whispered, "You belong to me." In a final act of defiance, Celia ran for a side exit that led to a narrow fire escape. The entity's laughter boomed behind her as she climbed the rickety stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. When she finally burst out onto the cold, rain-slicked pavement, the building loomed behind her like a living nightmare, a place that had swallowed its inhabitants in darkness. Later that night, as the police and building maintenance crews arrived to investigate, Celia recounted her harrowing experience. The building had a dark past, a history of unexplained tragedies and disappearances during the night shift. While no one could fully explain what had happened, rumors spread about a demonic presence that claimed the building as its own. Though the authorities sealed off the building and vowed to conduct a thorough investigation, Celia never returned to work at that location. Her story, and the accounts of others who had experienced strange occurrences on the graveyard shift, began to circulate online, sending shivers down the spines of those who read them. In the aftermath, the building stood abandoned, a relic of a cursed era. And every night, as the city slept, a faint, demonic whisper seemed to echo through its empty halls. A reminder that some nightmares refuse to die, and that sometimes working the graveyard shift can awaken forces beyond our control.